Tonight, we're opening up a file, a truth that, let's be honest, is often deliberately ignored, sometimes actively buried by political narratives. What you think you know about who genuinely belongs in the Levant, about the actual biological identity of the people there today, is fundamentally scientifically, well, wrong. Throughout this episode, we rely on concrete genomic studies authority, not vague authority. For example, large ancient DNA surveys led by Lazeridis and colleagues have mapped the broad genetic structure of the ancient Near East. Targeted work on the Levant and on modern Lebanese was carried out by Haber and colleagues. And high-coverage sequencing and demographic modeling of Ashkenazi genomes was done by Karmi and colleagues. I'll quote specific papers by name as we go, because the details, which samples were used and which comparison panels were chosen, matter to the conclusions we draw. And it concerns that the very identities fighting over this land today are biologically from the exact same ancient family tree.
It's quite startling when you see it laid out.
My name is Alexander, and I'm with my friend Maria. So stay with us. Please stay till the end, because the knowledge we're going to unlock, it will challenge, maybe even shatter the foundational myths that drive both sides of this agonizing conflict.
And before we really dive in, just stop for a second. This isn't background noise. This is material. It demands your full attention. We're about to cross a threshold, where all the political convenience, the historical myths, they just dissolve under the hard light of biological archaeological fact.
Yeah.
This isn't passive listening, it's work,
Yeah.
intellectual labor.
Yeah.
We're here to synthesize these studies. Archaeology, the population genetics, they all converge. They all point to this profound shared genetic heritage between modern Jews and Palestinians.
So that's the mission today, to confront this head on. The central idea that despite 2 millennia of social divergence, religious linguistic splits, one group staying, one group scattering across the globe, and they both share this common genetic foundation rooted way back in the Bronze Age. So the conflict, when you look at it through the scientific lens, it's not really between strangers at all.
No, it's between descendants of the very same ancient ancestors. It is a family affair, tragically.
So to really map this deep history, thousands of years of people moving, settling in the Levant, not simple. You have to rely on a rigorous approach. Braids together genetics, archaeology, and even historical linguistics. We call it the triad of genetic history. And to reconstruct this ancient DNA landscape, the scientists, our witnesses here, they use 3 main tools. Each one gives us a different piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Let's unpack that methodology because, understanding the tools, that's how we can trust the findings, right?
Right.
Well, 3 different types of DNA. Why not just one?
That's a great question, because relying on just one marker, it would give us a really incomplete picture.
Yeah.
DNA, at DNA. Think of it as the whole picture DNA.
Right.
You inherit it from all your ancestors, mother, father, grandparents, going way back. And at DNA is absolutely crucial for figuring out something called admixture.
That tells us the percentages, the recipe, exactly the proportions of ancestry from different ancient groups, like how much came from ancient farmers in Anatolia, how much from local hunter-gatherers, So it gives us the overall genetic recipe of a population.
So at DNA is the ingredient list.
Got it.
But what if we want to trace like a continuous family line through history, the surnames of the past, so to speak? Where do we look then?
That's where the more specialized tools come in.
Yeah.
The ones that don't get mixed up every generation. We use mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, because passed down only from mother to child, exclusively maternal. So it lets us trace these unbroken maternal lineages way back. It helps researchers see if there was continuity or maybe a big disruption in the history of the women in a community.
Like if a lot of women married in from outside the community?
Precisely. If there's significant female migration or intermarriage, the mtDNA signature changes pretty quickly.
And then the third tool, which seems arguably the most powerful for tracing history in patriarchal societies like the ancient Levant, the father's line.
Absolutely. The Y-chromosome, YDMA, it passes almost exclusively from father to son, unchanged generation after generation.
Which makes it especially useful and incredibly reliable for tracing male family lineages over many generations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect for tracking patrilineal lines, confirming genetic continuity, or identifying what we call founder effect, where a few founding males leave a big genetic mark. And here's the critical point. When we look at the Y-DNA across Levant today, in modern Jews, Palestinians, Samaritans, Druze, guess what do we see?
Yeah.
A shared pattern that consistently appears across individuals, revealing a deeper underlying connection.
a profound sharing of specific markers. Haplogroups J1 and J2, these are classic Semitic markers, and E1B1B, which has deep roots in North Africa and the Near East.
So these aren't just minor overlaps, pursue. Yeah, they're clear, significant patterns that keep showing up.
The fact that these foundational paternal markers are shared in such high frequencies, it immediately screams common deep history on that land, undeniable.
So that's the first big anchor, then the shared paternal signature. But for critical thinking, we have to acknowledge the limits. No study is perfect, especially with ancient DNA. What are the caveats the sources mention? Right.
That's crucial. Good science always acknowledges its limitations. The data is strong, it's robust, but it's not perfect everywhere. For instance, ancient DNA samples, they often come from the places that are easier to excavate, right? Big coastal cities like Sidon or Ashkelon.
Which means it might not fully represent everyone or capture the complete diversity of the population. Right.
That might introduce a bias. Those sites might not fully capture the genetic diversity of people living inland in more isolated rural areas, the folks who are maybe less mobile historically, right? And then there's preservation. DNA doesn't survive equally well everywhere. Climate, geology, it makes the data patchy across time and space. And finally, while the overall admixture results are consistent across different studies, which is really important, the exact percentages, do you remember that recipe we talked about? Well, it can vary slightly. Depends on the specific algorithms the lab uses, which ancient residence populations they compare against. Minor variations, but worth noting. Before we continue, let's take a quick pause to talk about why numbers vary between studies. First, there's what's called the reference population problem. We don't have DNA from every ancient group, so researchers compare modern genomes to the closest available ancient proxies. First, if the proxy isn't perfect, the numbers shift. Second, the algorithms differ. Admixture clusters allele frequencies, cube add-ins and F statistics model proportions relative to chosen sources. Haplotype-based tools like ChromoPainter or RFMix exploit shared DNA segments to estimate ancestry and admixture timing. They can all give different percentages on the exact same genomes. Third, uniparental markers, Y-chromosomes and mitochondria, trace only a single paternal or maternal line, and those can diverge from the autosomal picture. None of this means the science is unreliable, and these are the growing pains of a very young field, and that's why we must always give caveats when quoting numbers. And finally, sample sizes and which modern populations are included as neighbors also matter.
Good to keep in mind. All right, so with the tools and the limitations laid out, let's dig into that common foundation, the Bronze Age core, the Canaanite people. This is where I think the historical narratives really start to buckle under the scientific weight.
They really do, the Canaanites. They are the essential substrate, the genetic common trunk. Right? Almost all later Levantine groups Vapiro, and this includes the ancient Israelites Vapiros, they emerged from this Canaanite base.
So not a distinct empire. Yeah, more like.
More like a constellation of prosperous city-states. Byblos, Tyre, Sidon along the coast, Megiddo, Hazor inland. They shared a culture, a Proto-Canaanite language, and, critically for us, a common gene pool.
And they were plugged into everything, right? The hub of ancient Near East trade, the Via Maris route.
Yes, absolutely central. And their cultural echo is still here, not just in one word, but in the very fabric of daily speech. Take the Semitic root MLK for king, Melech in Hebrew, Malik in Arabic. But it doesn't stop there. The word for sun, shemesh in Hebrew, shams in Arabic, comes from the same Canaanite root, milk, halab in Hebrew, halib in Arabic, shares the root AHLB. These aren't borrowings. They're linguistic fossils preserved for over 3,000 years, proving that Hebrew and Arabic didn't just meet, they grew from the same ancestral tongue. So that single linguistic fossil points right back to a shared Proto-Canaanite language from millennia ago.
Okay, got it now. Let's get clinical, as you say. Describe that Canaanite genetic makeup. What were the actual ingredients?
We can sort of map it like a composite picture built up over thousands of years, layer upon layer of migration and mixing. The foundational layer, the absolute bedrock, that's the Natufian hunter-gatherers.
Are you saying that they are the original inhabitants? Am I correct?
The indigenous people of the Levant, yes. Present before farming started around 12,000 years ago, they are the deepest genetic layer.
All right, layer one, the Natufians. So what came next?
The biggest wave, the most substantial contribution, came from the Anatolian Neolithic farmers.
Originating from the region of modern-day Turkey, at the very crossroads between Europe and the Near East.
Migrating down from Anatolia, bringing farming knowledge around 9,000 years ago. Their arrival really shifted the genetic profile of the Levant. That Anatolian component became dominant. Yeah.
And what about the final layer from here? The one that emerges right around the peak of the Bronze Age.
Right around 2500 BCE, we see this key infusion from the east, ancestry linked to Zagros Neolithic farmers from the mountains of modern Iran, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers from the region between the Black and Caspian Seas.
And this final wave, what exactly is it linked to?
It correlates strongly with the spread of Indo-European languages, but also crucially, new technologies, especially bronze making. This added that final significant layer to the Canaanite identity.
What's just incredible, though, is that this ancient blueprint, this specific mix, Natufian, Anatolian, Zagros, it didn't just disappear, it's still here.
Here's the concrete result from the Sidon and Lebanon study. When modern Lebanese genomes were modeled as mixtures, using Bronze Age Sidon samples as a proxy, the best-fitting model reported about 93.2% of contribution from that Bronze Age Sidon component, with a standard error of about 1.6%. That translates into a 95% confidence interval of roughly 90 to 96%. But here's the important caveat. Sidon_BA is a stand-in for Bronze Age Levantine ancestry, and the exact percentage depends on the reference populations chosen. So the take-home is that modern Lebanese genomes are overwhelmingly continuous with Bronze Age Levantines, plus there's also a small later admixture signal that shows up afterward in the genetic record.
So if it's around 90%, that means they weren't actually replaced, right?
Not at all. This wasn't a population that got wiped out. It transformed, adapted, persisted. This 4,000-year-old biological signature, you find it at equally high levels in the Druze, in Samaritans, and crucially for this discussion, in modern Palestinians.
Impressive. This brings us to, well, a really pivotal point. The science shows this shared foundation, and it means the ancient Israelites themselves, they weren't outsiders sweeping in. They were locals, a branch of these Canaanites. But let's be historically precise. By the time of the Roman Empire, no one in this land called themselves Canaanite. That term had vanished from daily self-identification, features over 1,000 years earlier, and yet the word never truly disappeared. It survived not as a living identity, but as a cultural and theological marker, a ghost in the archive of memory. Here's a fascinating example. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus encounters a woman described as a Canaanite. But in the Gospel of Mark, the very same woman is called Syrophoenician. Why the difference?
Simply because Canaanite was the ancient biblical term, the language of the Hebrew scriptures, loaded with centuries of religious meaning. For a Jewish audience, it evoked the archetypal foreigner, the idolatrous enemy of Israel. Meanwhile, Syrophoenician was the geopolitical label of the Roman era, precise, administrative, neutral. The Phoenicians themselves never even called themselves Phoenicians. They were Tyrians, Sidonians, Biblians, citizens of city-states, not a nation. And this distinction actually mirrors who each gospel was written for. According to the earliest Christian tradition, the Gospel of Matthew was composed primarily for a Jewish audience, deeply rooted in the Hebrew scriptures and sensitive to covenant identity. Which is why Matthew deliberately reaches for the ancient biblical term Canaanite. In contrast, the Gospel of Mark was addressed to non-Jewish Christians, likely in the Roman world, accustomed to administrative imperial geography. So Syrophoenician is the precise Roman era descriptor that would make immediate sense to them.
Hold on. Wait. So no one walked the streets of first century Galilee saying, I am a Canaanite. But the word lingered in sacred texts, in polemics, in memory. The people here called themselves Judeans, Galileans, Samaritans, or simply Israelites, even when they had converted to Christianity. So Canaanite is a label archaeologists and geneticists use today to describe the Bronze Age genetic and cultural substrate, not an identity people claimed in antiquity. It's scientific shorthand to the common ancestry that gave rise to Israelites, Phoenicians, Ammonites, Moabites, and others.
Precisely. Yeah. Culturally distinct, yes. Politically, religiously, they carved out their own identity.
And that identity they forged, a political, religious forge, would eventually give birth to a word that would change everything. A word we still use today, often without knowing its true origin. The word Jew. Yeah. Where does it really come from? Because this word, it's not what you really think.
So, exactly. Jew doesn't mean Israelite, totally. Not originally. It means Judahite, that's someone from the kingdom of Judah. After King Solomon's death, around 930 BCE, the United Kingdom of Israel split. North, the kingdom of Israel; south, the kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. The northern kingdom, which retained the name Israel, was composed of tensions of the 12 tribes, including the powerful tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Conversely, the southern kingdom, called Judah, which was made up primarily of the two remaining tribes, Judah and Benjamin, along with the majority of the Levites who served in the Jerusalem temple. It is this concentration around the tribe of Judah that made the designation Judahite relevant for the descendants of this kingdom, especially after the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 BCE.
So Jew is Judahite. In Hebrew, Yehudi. In Arabic, Yahudi. In ancient Greek, Judaios. All from Judah. It's a geographic label, not ethnic, not religious at first, just from the south.
And here's where it gets crucial, Pam, especially for our French and English-speaking listeners. In French and English, the word juif or Jew is ambiguous. It can mean someone who practices Judaism or someone whose ancestors come from the Levant, even if they're atheist. We don't make the distinction.
Exactly. Let's think of it like this. If I live in California, that makes me a Californian saint. And if there was a religion followed specifically by people from California, they might call it Californianism. Then the word Californian could mean two things at once. It could refer to where I'm from geographically or to the religion I practice. By Judean, we're Israelite, and Californian are American. Even though Israelite is a ethnic group, but American is not. But it's just to understand. And I think that's the reason. In France or America, if you say a Jew, it could mean a rabbi or a secular Israeli from Tel Aviv. The language itself blurs the line. But in Hebrew or Arabic, precision is forced. In Hebrew, you'll say Yehudi Dati for religious Jew, Yehudi Leumi for secular Jew. In Arabic, Yahudi for the ethnicity, Mutamassik bil Yahudiya for the practitioner.
It fuels the conflict. When a politician says the Jews have a right to return, he's mixing religion and ancestry, forgetting that Palestinians, even Muslim, share that same ancestry. When a militant says Jews are European colonists, he's confusing Ashkenazim with all Jews, forgetting that 70% of Israelis are Mizrahim or Sephardim, genetically brothers of Palestinians.
So this word Jew is not a divine category. It's not a racial one. It's a historical, geographic label. And it's not exclusive. Science reminds us Jew comes from Judah, but Judah was just one branch of the Israelite tree. Some of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel has left the land for several reasons. Others, they stayed. They became the Palestinians.
So now that we've deconstructed the word Jew, let's return to those who never left the land and to those whose DNA tells an unbroken story stretching back over 3,000 years.
By order of the Emperor and the Senate of Rome, this province is to be redefined under a new name.
Judea exists no more. From this day forth it shall be called Syria Palestina. Let the name of Judaid fade, and let all nations know Rome is eternal, Rome is supreme, and rebellion will never triumph.
This is an insult. We are Israelites, sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. We will never accept this name of Palestine. We will never forget who we are. No Israelite will accept this name, neither today nor tomorrow, and ever. We are the children of David, not Goliath.
Israel! 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 Israel!
This is what we shall see.
Israel! 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 Hurriya! Hurriya!
لأهل فلسطين أي حق تاريخي في فلسطين من 2000 و3000 سنة و4000 سنة. يعني حق الفلسطينيين الكنعانيين في فلسطين زي حق الفراعنة في مصر. معقول واحد مسلم في مصر يقول أنا فرعوني وأفتخر، زي واحد فلسطيني مسلم يقول أنا كنعاني وأفتخر؟ تبا لكنعانيتك وتبا لفرعونيته. تاريخنا بسيط يا جماعة، ملوش زمان. تاريخنا كله 1440 سنة بس. احنا قبل 1440 سنة ما كان لنا أي نوع من الحقوق نهائيا. لا يقال بأنه فلسطين لها الفلسطينيون لهم جذور كنعانية، ويعني بدنا نرجع لكلام ياسر عرفات اللي ضيع القضية. قال القوم الجبارين أنتم القوم شعب الجبارين. سبة، أول مرة بشوف رئيس بسب شعبه. شعبه الفلسطيني شعب مسلم، فإن قلت له أنت شعب الجبارين أنت سبيت عليه، أنت أهنته، أنت أرجعته إلى أيام الكفر والطاغوت. لازم بس تقول أيها الفلسطينيون أنتم مسلمون.
First, we have to immediately confront that persistent myth, the one used constantly to deny their historical connection to the land.
The narrative that Palestinians are basically just descendants of Arab invaders from the 7th century. Yes.
They're actually relative newcomers, right? At least according to that persistent, oversimplified narrative.
Right. Yes. And this narrative, which is often deployed politically to undermine Palestinian claims to be native to the land, it just completely collapses. I mean, when you look at the high-resolution genetic data.
Okay. So what does the data actually show? Could you be precise, please?
Oh. All right. Let's look at Palestinians. Estimates from genome-wide studies, but including the 2024 Harvard Medical School analysis, really show Palestinian ancestry is 81 to 87% Bronze Age Levantine sources, but the exact numbers vary. UP-Adam and admixture models using Bronze Age Southern Levantine samples as proxies. The Palestinian estimates fall in the low 80s to high 80s% range, say about 81 to 87%. The rest reflects later inputs, often modeled as Arabian Peninsula or other Near Eastern. It's also worth noting that earlier Y-chromosome studies, Niebel and colleagues, for example, looked only at paternal lineages, which overlap heavily with Jewish and other Levantine groups, but those don't directly translate into autosomal percentages. So when we say Palestinians are about 80 to 87% Canaanite Levantine, that is shorthand for model results that depend on specific ancient proxies.
So when you look at the numbers, it's actually somewhere around 80 to 85% of the total.
Yeah. It confirms this profound, deep local continuity stretching back millennia. It directly links them to the Bronze Age Canaanite substrate we were just talking about. Yeah. The deep ancestral layer that still forms the core of their genetic profile.
So genetically speaking, they're the group that actually experienced the least amount of demographic change in the region over that huge time span. Yeah.
That's exactly right. The genetic analyses show Palestinians clustering tightly with other Levantine populations known for their antiquity. And importantly, lower levels of outside mixing. Groups like the Samaritans, the Druze, Lebanese Christians.
And when we say distinct, what exactly are we comparing them to?
Distinctly separate from Peninsular Arab populations, people whose ancestry is mainly from the Arabian Peninsula itself.
How so? I mean, what exactly is the difference in their genetic signature?
Peninsular Arabs have a profile dominated by that deep indigenous Natufian hunter-gatherer component, which makes sense for Arabia. But they generally lack the high proportions of the Anatolian and Zagros farmer DNA that really define the Levantine genetic profile that formed in the Levant after those major migration waves in antiquity.
But hang on, the Arab conquest in the 7th century did happen. Islam, the Arabic language, a new empire. That must have left some genetic mark.
It did, absolutely. But the key word is modest, and it seems primarily restricted to certain paternal lines, probably reflecting migration routes and administrative centers.
So just to be clear, we're not talking about a full population replacement here, right?
Definitely not. In terms of overall genetic makeup, the contribution from the Arabian Peninsula is generally quite superficial. Typically, it accounts for maybe 5 to 10% in the more isolated mountainous areas. Now, that percentage might creep up slightly, maybe to 15 or even 20% in specific coastal areas or the Jordan Valley, likely due to early Arab settlements and garrisons.
But the core ancestry, that foundational layer, does it remains essentially the same?
But the core of the genome, 80% or more, remains solidly ancient Levantine, undisturbed in essence.
This forces us then to make a really crucial distinction, Charles, and this feels like the core takeaway for this section. Arabization was a cultural shift, not a demographic replacement. Long before the Islamic conquest, Arab tribes were already part of this landscape. The Ghassanids, Christian Arabs who had migrated from the southern Arabian Peninsula centuries earlier, settled in southern Syria and modern-day Jordan. They became a Byzantine allied kingdom, ruling lands that were already inhabited by ancient peoples, the Nabateans, Arameans, Judeans, and the heirs of Moab, Edom, and Ammon. Similarly, the Lakhmids, with their capital at Al-Hira near the lower Euphrates in what is now southern central Iraq, ruled under Persian patronage. They governed a region where Arameans, Mesopotamians, and settled Arab tribes already lived. Al-Hira was a major urban and political center long before and during their dominance. For even earlier, in the 3rd century CE, the Tanukids, a powerful Arab Christian tribal confederation from northern Arabia, established themselves in southern Syria, and northern Arabia as Byzantine foederati. They coexisted with local populations including Arameans, Nabateans, and established Christian and pagan communities. Over time, they became deeply rooted in the region. They spoke Arabic and Greek and worshiped Christ and defended the empire's eastern frontier. So when the Muslim armies arrived in the 7th century, they did not encounter a land of strangers. They met Arab-speaking Christians, Judeans, Samaritans, and even Arab tribes who had been living there for generations. The transformation that followed was not about new people arriving. It was about a new faith, a new language, and a new political order becoming dominant.
You are right. That is the absolute defining observation here. The vast majority of the local population, who, remember, were largely the descendants of ancient Israelites and other Canaanite groups who had stayed put. They didn't vanish. They gradually adopted the Arabic language, and over many, many centuries, most converted to Islam. It was a slow, layered process. Linguistic change, cultural change, religious change. It wasn't a sudden population swap or a massive wave of migration washing over the land.
And the sources, the historical record, they're pretty clear about why people converted.
Yeah, but I got to tell you this transformation wasn't just about taxes or jobs. It unfolded over centuries, slowly, unevenly, and often peacefully. For the first 200 years of Islamic rule, most people in the Levant were still Christian, Jewish, or Samaritan. The Arab conquerors didn't force mass conversions. In fact, they often discouraged them because non-Muslims paid the jizya, a vital source of state revenue. Though Arabic spread first as the language of administration, trade, and poetry, long before it became the language of prayer for most. And when people did convert, it wasn't only for survival. Many were drawn by the spiritual appeal of Islam, especially through the quiet work of Sufi mystics who settled in villages, spoke the local dialect, and blended Islamic teachings with familiar traditions. And crucially, this wasn't just about peasants or individuals. Entire indigenous elites made the shift. Take the Ghassanids, a powerful Arab Christian dynasty that had ruled southern Syria and northern Jordan for centuries as Byzantine allies, and their eastern counterparts, the Lakhmids, who ruled from Azira under Persian patronage. Both were indigenous Arab elites long settled in the region. After the Islamic conquest, many Ghassanid clans gradually converted to Islam, not as outsiders, but as locals repositioning themselves within the new order. Their descendants became governors, poets, and military leaders under the Umayyads, still rooted in the same land, speaking Arabic, but now Muslim. Or consider the Banu Kalb, another Arab tribe long settled in the Syrian desert and the Golan, originally Christian or pagan. They intermarried with the Umayyad caliphs and became key power brokers, not because they came from Arabia, but because they were already here for generations. These weren't foreign invaders becoming locals. They were locals becoming Muslim while keeping their land, their networks, and their bloodline intact. The Islamic conquest changed everything. It imposed linguistic, religious, administrative. This wasn't genocide. It was a cultural revolution.
They didn't replace anyone. They just changed the faith, the language, and the political structure of the region. And this revolution didn't affect everyone the same way. In Gaza, influenced by Egypt for centuries, DNA shows more mixing, up to 20% Egyptian input. In Galilee, Kurdish and Circassian inputs left by the Mamluks in the 13th century, who settled loyal tribes to control the region.
In Jerusalem, a genetic mosaic crossroads of empires. But in the West Bank, in the mountains of Nablus or Hebron, the DNA is almost intact. 85% Canaanite. These are the lands of the Fellahin, the traditional Palestinian peasant farmers. Genetic studies from Tel Aviv University and Harvard identify them as the guardians of ancient Israelite DNA. Their relative isolation preserved a genetic signature, so close to First Temple period Israelite that a stela from a Hebron village today shares more ancestry with King David's people than with most Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula.
And why are Palestinian Christians so genetically close to ancient Israelites? Because staying Christian under the caliphs, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, it wasn't just a political move, it was experienced as an act of resistance and a defense of identity and autonomy.
A choice of poverty, sometimes danger. Internal marriages close communities to survive. Their DNA is a time capsule, not a miracle, a survival strategy. But it's crucial to understand, this identity didn't begin with Christianity. Long before Islam, even before the destruction of the Second Temple, people in this land, whether they worshipped Yahweh or local deities, often saw themselves as descendants of Israel. The Roman province wasn't called Palestine until 135 CE, when Emperor Hadrian renamed it to erase Jewish memory. Yet for centuries after, villagers in Galilee or Samaria still traced their lineage to the tribes of Jacob. The genetic continuity is matched by a deep, often forgotten, historical self-awareness, and one that only faded when Arabic and Islam gradually emerged as the new cultural framework, redefining public life, institutions, and identity across the region. To give you a concrete example, in the time of Jesus Christ, the 1st century CE, this land was never called Palestine. Neither by the Roman occupiers nor by its inhabitants. The official Roman name of the province was Judea. Roman governors like Pontius Pilate bore the title Precept of Judea. Coins minted by Rome in Jerusalem read Iudaea in Latin. Jesus and his contemporaries called it the Land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael in Hebrew, or Aram in Aramaic. Even Roman-era Jewish historians like Josephus referred to it as Judea, or the Jewish land. For the name Palestine did not exist in their vocabulary, not in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, not in Latin, not in Greek. As I said earlier, it was imposed in 135 CE by Emperor Hadrian after crushing the Bar Kokhba revolt as a deliberate act of erasure. He abolished the province of Judea and renamed it Syria Palestina, linking it to the Philistines, the ancient enemies of Israel, intended to humiliate the Jewish people and to sever their historical connection to the land. Through the destruction of the temple, the word Judaios began to shift from a geographic identity to a religious one. Those who followed Christ increasingly called themselves Galileans or Nazarenes, but they still knew they were children of Israel.
But Palestinian Muslims are not a homogeneous bloc, Saints. They encompass diverse regional histories, class backgrounds, and religious traditions.
Some descend from families who converted 1,300 years ago, others from Bedouin tribes who arrived later, others still from African or Circassian migrants integrated over centuries. Their DNA tells a story of mixing, but the foundation remains Levantine.
And then there are the Samaritans. Today, only 800 remain, but their DNA is nearly identical to that of Israelites from the First Temple, according to Tel Aviv University study 2023.
Why? Because they never left their mountain near Nablus. They never changed their religion. But, and this is crucial, most of their Samaritan cousins did convert to Islam over the centuries.
So their descendants are the Muslim Palestinians of Nablus today. Their DNA hasn't changed. Only their identity was erased.
For the Druze, it is 90% Canaanite DNA, a closed endogamous community born in the 11th century. They, too, are living witnesses to what Palestinians and Jews once were, before the forgetting.
Being Jewish or Christian under the empires came at a price. The Druze chose another path, a secret faith, a closed community. But their blood never lied. Can we maybe use some of those ancestry percentages we talked about earlier to really highlight the difference between Palestinians and, say, Peninsular Arabs?
Yes, let's look at those core components again. In modern Palestinians, you consistently see high percentages of that Anatolian Neolithic farmer DNA makes up the majority of the Palestinian genetic profile, roughly 41.8% Anatolian, plus 23.2% Zagros, about 65% in total. That's a fundamentally Levantine founding ancestry.
Right.
Palestinians are not Arabs in the genetic sense. They are Levantines who speak Arabic. True Peninsular Arabs, by contrast, carry about 67% Natufian hunter-gatherer DNA.
Okay, and compare that to Arabs from the Gulf. They carry mostly Natufian hunter-gatherer DNA, a very different ancestral profile from Palestinians.
So clearly a big difference. In Peninsular Arabs, those same percentages are dramatically lower, often around 7.6% for the Anatolian farmer component and maybe 21.2% for the Zagros part.
What dominates their genetic profile instead? Yeah, what is the primary ancestral component for them?
That deep Natufian hunter-gatherer component we mentioned, it can reach up to 67% in some Peninsular Arab groups, reflecting a much longer, distinct evolutionary history within the Arabian Peninsula itself.
It draws a pretty clear genetic line, then a real separation between two ancestral worlds.
Provides a really unambiguous genetic demarcation. Palestinians are genomically Levantine, clearly distinct from Peninsular Arabs, completely different genetic worlds, and this isn't unique to Palestine. In Europe, Greeks and Albanians, same geographic neighborhood, completely distinct ancestry. In Africa, Ethiopians and West Africans, same continent, different genetic universe. In Asia, Koreans and Han Chinese, close neighbors, not the same lineage. Same story in the Americas and in Oceania, proximity doesn't equal identical origins. Language can shift, religion can shift, but ancestry doesn't. Palestinians became Arabized culturally, not biologically. Their genetic core is Bronze Age Levantine. It never disappears. It simply absorbs later layers.
Okay, so if the science is this clear, okay, that the people who stayed, the Palestinians, are primarily the continuous biological descendants of the ancient Canaanites and Israelites. Okay, what does that profound continuity mean when we look at the people who left? That's the challenge of the diaspora identities shifting across time and geography. Let's move into that next.
The Israelites have dared to rise against Rome, but it is the Judeans who bear the greatest guilt. They defied empire under Bar Kokhba, spilling blood and challenging peace. By decree of the Senate and the people of Rome, Judea shall exist no more. From this day forth it shall be called Syria Palestina. Let the name of Judea fade, and let all nations know Rome is eternal, Rome is supreme, and rebellion will never triumph.
This is our plot.
It's small, but we will make it a home.
We are finally home.
By the grace of God.
Shalom, and a blessed day to you.
Baruch haba.
לשנה הבאה בירושלים.
We turn now to the Jewish populations of the diaspora, and we have to start by acknowledging the complexity here. Jewish communities around the world, they aren't genetically monolithic. Not at all. They are a mosaic shaped by 2,000 years of living among and sometimes mixing with host population.
But there's a common thread, something that persists through all those migrations and identities, I guess.
But, and this is crucial, every single credible genetic analysis confirms that they all retain a fundamental persistent Levantine genetic nucleus, a core signature that ties every diaspora group back to that original trunk in Levant.
Okay, let's break down the main branches the sources talk about, starting with the groups that stayed closest, geographically and genetically.
That would be the Mizrahim. Jews from communities in Iraq, Yemen, Iran, Syria, other parts of the Middle East and North Africa. In numbers, some autosomal models report between 70 and 85% Levantine or Middle Eastern ancestry, but the exact point estimate varies. Behar et al. And Atzmon et al. In 2010 both showed that these groups cluster tightly with other Near Eastern populations and share substantial identity by descent segments. So while you might see slightly different percentages of 76% here, 82% there, the robust conclusion is that the majority of Mizrahi ancestry is continuous with the Levant and the surrounding Middle East.
76 to 82%. That's an enormous proportion. Yeah. Really emphasizing how dominant it is.
It is, and it places them genetically very close to the rural Palestinians and the Samaritans who are still living in the region today. Their separation has been primarily about culture and religion, not deep biological divergence.
Okay, moving west then, across the Mediterranean. The Sephardim, connected to Spain, Portugal, North Africa.
With the Sephardim, we see the first really significant pattern of admixture, of mixing. Their Levantine core is still substantial, estimated somewhere between 50 and 70%, but the rest is a mix of Iberian, North African, and other Southern European ancestries.
Reflecting their history, a story of exile and return, of cultures blending between the Levant, North Africa, and Iberia.
Exactly. It reflects their history as a mobile population, bridging the Mediterranean, interacting with many different groups. However, not all researchers agree, and it's important to acknowledge the controversies. For example, El Haik in 2013 published a paper arguing for a much higher share of Caucasus and European ancestry across Jewish populations, the so-called Khazar hypothesis. That paper was widely criticized for methodological reasons, for example, the choice of proxies and the interpretation of allele frequency clusters, but it shows that the field is not unanimous. On the flip side, whole genome sequencing work by Karmi and colleagues in 2014 and haplotype-based timing by Shu and colleagues in 2017 argue instead for a model of mixed Middle Eastern and European ancestry, with founder sex and bottlenecks in the Ashkenazi population. And if we zoom back to Palestinians and their neighbors, some regional studies have found that southern groups, especially those near the Negev or Sinai, show slightly higher Arabian Peninsula ancestry than northern Levantines. None of these findings overturn the core picture of continuity, but they remind us that the genetic landscape is nuanced and debated.
And now, the most complex case, the one that generates the most debate, often politically charged Ashkenazi.
According to high-resolution genomic studies, including Doff et al. In 2016, Zhu et al. In 2017, and the 2024 Harvard Medical School update on Levantine admixture, Ashkenazi Jews carry between 19 and 43% Levantine ancestry, with the remainder primarily Mediterranean European, especially from Southern Europe. Older studies, like Atzmon et al. In 2010, using different reference panels, estimated the Levantine component higher, between 40 and 60%. This variation reflects real methodological differences, but the consensus is clear. Ashkenazim are a mixed population with a persistent Middle Eastern core and a substantial Southern European layer.
But this complexity, this European admixture, it's been used to fuel a really dangerous myth, hasn't it? The claim that Ashkenazi Jews are basically just European converts, like Khazar theory, which gets brought up sometimes, right? That there's no real biological link back to the Middle East. So if their maternal lines, the mtDNA, often show European origins, how strong is the scientific case for their Levantine roots?
This is the absolute critical question, and it's where the genetics deliver a really decisive refutation of that purely European convert myth. We have to look, once again, at the paternal signature, the Y-chromosome. While multiple studies do consistently show that a large proportion, maybe even a majority, of Ashkenazi maternal lines, the mtDNA trace back to Europe. The paternal, completely different story. They are massively, almost entirely Middle Eastern in their genetic makeup, despite centuries spent in the Mediterranean and Europe.
Wow, explain that contrast. Why would the father's line be so different?
The Y-chromosome evidence in paternal lineages tells a powerful but nuanced story. Multiple studies, going back to Hammer in 1000 and Neville in 2001, show that Ashkenazi men overwhelmingly carry Y-chromosome haplogroups like J1 and J2, which are classic markers of the Near East. In fact, the majority of Ashkenazi paternal lines cluster tightly with those of other Jewish groups, Mizrahim, Sephardim, and with Palestinians and other Levantine populations, but let's be precise. It's not quasi-integral. The exact proportion varies depending on the community sampled. For example, Kohanim versus other Ashkenazim and rare lineages do exist. The key takeaway isn't perfection, but ease. The paternal signal is strongly and consistently Levantine, even if not 100%. And crucially, remember, the Y-chromosome traces just one ancestral line out of thousands. It's a vital clue, but not the whole story.
So how do scientists explain that? Levantine fathers, European mothers.
The consensus model, built over years of research, suggests exactly that scenario. Ancestral Levantine Jewish men migrated out of the Middle East, settling across the Roman Empire, eventually moving into Europe. They managed to retain their paternal genetic signature and their religious and cultural identity through generations, often through endogamy, marrying within the community, but also clearly by marrying local European women at various points in history.
Right, which explains the European mtDNA, a trace of maternal ancestry from their centuries in Iberia and the wider Mediterranean.
Precisely. It explains the strong maternal European input. So the paternal bloodline is clearly Levantine, passed down through the generations, even as the maternal context became increasingly European.
That's a pretty stunning example of cultural and genetic persistence driven by male lineage over centuries. We should also briefly touch on the Black Jewish communities mentioned in the sources. They show how far this Levantine thread can reach.
Yes, they add another layer of complexity and show the vastness of the diaspora experience. Take the Beta Israel of Ethiopia. Genetically, the vast majority of their ancestry is local Ethiopian, that's clear, but studies consistently detect a smaller but significant Middle Eastern component, like maybe 5 to 15%. It suggests ancient complex contacts, migrations, intermarriage happening over millennia. Not a simple story.
And the really unique finding among the Lemba people in Southern Africa, this one always fascinates me.
The Lemba are primarily of local Bantu origin, genetically speaking, but remarkably, a notable proportion of Lemba minors carry what's known as the Cohen modal haplotype. It's a specific genetic marker on the Y chromosome, a subtype of haplogroup J1 that is strongly associated with ancient Jewish priestly lineages, the Kohanim.
So a direct paternal link back to the ancient Levant, a lineage that's been remarkably well preserved through millennia.
It strongly suggests a Semitic paternal link that somehow traveled thousands of miles south and was preserved, passed down through generations, despite the vast cultural and geographic distance. It just underscores the power and persistence of that original Levantine Y-DNA signal.
It really is fascinating. What strikes me here is that the genetic thread connecting all these communities, from an Ashkenazi family in Poland to a Mizrahi family in Baghdad, even to the Lemba in South Africa, is ultimately the same ancient Canaanite seed DNA that also rooted the Palestinians firmly on that land.
That's a convergence of different historical paths leading back to the same ancestral core in the Levant.
By the way, I'd like to say what's ironic about the Ashkenazi story is this. In Europe, even after centuries of life there, they were still treated as outsiders, as Semites. Europeans sometimes even told to go back to Palestine. That's where the term anti-Semitism comes from. Even Nazi propaganda called them Orientals, Asiatics in Europe, saying they didn't belong. And yet, today, some try to claim they're not Semitic at all. It's a cruel historical paradox.
Like some people say that Palestinians are Arabs and therefore should go to other Arab countries, when in fact, they are not Arabs at all in the genetic sense. That's really striking. It shows how identity can be imposed or denied depending on who's telling the story, and how deeply these historical narratives continue to shape perceptions, even today. Yet genetics ignores politics,
which forces us to confront the truly tragic implications of this shared ancestry. Let's move into that final chamber.
Hey everyone, it's Carlo. Welcome to our Duo podcast. If you're enjoying the vibe, feel free to follow, like, and share your thoughts with us, and it really helps the show reach more listeners. All right, let's dive back in, shall we? Picking up right where we left off in this episode.
להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו, אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל, הננו חותמים בחתימת ידינו לעדות על הכרזה זו.
גם אני אצא מפה הוא לא יחזור, אז מה?
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
We've arrived at the point of synthesis, Chamber the Fourth, the scientific revelation, genetic brothers. When you put it all together, the robust data showing the deep continuity and of the Palestinians that we covered in Chamber the Second, and the clear retention of that core Levantine ancestry by the Jewish diaspora we just discussed in Chamber the Third, the political narrative of separation, this idea of two entirely unrelated peoples with mutually exclusive claims, it just becomes biologically unsustainable.
Explain that siblings genetic brotherhood. How close are we talking scientifically?
This is perhaps the most profound and maybe uncomfortable finding for many. The genetic distance, a measure of biological relatedness separating certain Jewish groups from each other. For instance, the measured gap between an average Ashkenazi Jew and an average Mizrahi Jew. It exists, but it's surprisingly small. Geneticists often use something called FST to measure how different two populations are on average at the DNA level. And these numbers are tiny, just a few thousandths.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of scale, when comparing Mizrahi Jews and Palestinians, FST values usually fall somewhere between 0.002 and 0.08. That's extremely close. The gap between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews tends to be a bit larger, maybe 0.006 to 0.015. But even that is still small by global standards. In practical terms, it means Palestinians and Mizrahim are genetically very close, even closer on average than Ashkenazim are to Mizrahim. But of course, these results depend a lot on which subpopulations you compare and which genetic panels the researchers used. So rather than focusing on a single number, it's better to think in terms of ranges and to emphasize just how relatively close these groups are, genetically speaking. While these tiny decimal points tell a much bigger story, one of shared ancestry, migration, and centuries of intertwined history.
No, wait, let me make sure I heard that right. You're saying based purely on the genetic data, a Jew whose ancestors stayed in Iraq, he might be genetically closer kin to a Palestinian farmer from a nearby village than he is to a Jew whose ancestors moved to Poland centuries ago?
That is the inescapable biological implication revealed by population genetics. The significant European admixture in the Ashkenazi population creates a quantifiable genetic distance. It separates them more from the highly continuous Middle Eastern populations, which include both Mizrahi Jews and Palestinians, than those Middle Eastern groups are separated from each other.
That completely upends the usual narrative, Dovzi, that everything we've been taught suddenly looks different.
It biologically invalidates the notion that these are two hermetically sealed, unrelated peoples. They are, in the strictest biological sense, estranged brothers, branches of the same family tree that took vastly different paths.
I love that. Let's use that analogy of the tree again and really cement this for people listening.
Okay. Imagine the genetics history of the Levant like a single, ancient, massive olive tree, the trunk. That represent the original Canaanites and the early Israelites who emerged directly from that Bronze Age population. The shared foundation. Now, some branches stay put. The branches that stayed, these are the ancestors of modern Palestinians. They kept their roots deep in that original soil, changed completely over time, adopting Arabic language, adopting Islam. The outward appearance transformed.
Okay, so let's talk about the branches that moved abroad, the diaspora communities.
Those would be ancestors of the modern Jewish diaspora. They migrated out. They settled in distant lands, distant forests, or in Europe, North Africa, elsewhere. They inevitably mixed genetically with the surrounding populations, but they meticulously, remarkably preserved the original sap, the core religion, the cultural memory, the sense of connection back to the trunk, and critically, as we saw, those specific paternal Y-DNA markers that act like a genetic fingerprint, tying them back to the original tree, the original soil.
If they're biologically so close branches of the same tree, this brings us right to that profound identity paradox, the double amnesia. How on earth did two groups so intertwined by blood become so fiercely opposed, so ideologically separated?
It seems each group developed its own unique form of semantic amnesia, of forgetting or perhaps a strategic ignoring that allowed the narrative of absolute difference and exclusion to take root. Consider first the amnesia of the stay, the Palestinians, that long, slow process of cultural Arabization we talked about. It seems to have led to a kind of collective amnesia, the forgetting of their own deep biological and historical connection to the ancient Israelites, to the Hebrew language and culture that once dominated that land.
They essentially erased their own Israelite ancestry from their narratives.
Over the centuries, the descendants of ancient Israelites adopted the languages of empire. Aramaic under the Assyrians and Babylonians, Greek under the Hellenistic kingdoms, Arabic under the caliphates. Each was the tongue of power, not of blood. Today, some Palestinian citizens of Israel refuse to speak modern Hebrew not out of ignorance, but as a political act of resistance, seeing it as the language of an occupier, much like Greek once was. Yet here lies a profound irony. Modern Hebrew, revived in the 20th century, is far closer to the original Canaanite Hebrew of their Bronze Age ancestors than Greek, Aramaic, or even Classical Arabic ever were. It is not a foreign imposition, but a return to the root. And even in their refusal, their own Arabic dialects betray the truth. Woven with Hebrew and Aramaic roots, they carry a linguistic echo of the shared past they're taught to deny. They adopted a symbolic lineage tracing back to Ismail, who is seen in Islamic tradition as the ancestor of the Arabs, a powerful and meaningful identity. Yes. But here is the profound, almost unbearable irony revealed by the DNA. The Palestinians are, biologically, the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, who walked these same hills and spoke in the very dialects that echo in Palestinian Arabic today. And for Palestinian Christians, but also for Muslims, genetically, Jesus of Nazareth himself was one of their own, a Judean Israelite, born among the ancestors of those who never left the land. So when they claim Ishmael as their forefather in the context of this conflict, Franks, they are unknowingly denying their own royal and prophetic heritage, the very lineage that ties them to the deepest roots of this land. So according to science, it is not a rejection of faith. It is a tragic forgetting of blood. Yeah.
Okay, and conversely, what about the amnesia of the returned, the narrative often associated with modern Zionism?
The necessary and understandable emphasis on the deep, unbroken Jewish connection to the land, the claim of indigenous return, it often resulted in overlooking or downplaying the inconvenient scientific fact that the Palestinians already living there were objectively, without any doubt, the other major branch of that very same family.
The descendants of the Israelites who never left, who stayed rooted in the land itself.
The massive population of Israelites and related Canaanites who remained rooted in the land throughout history. And by omitting that crucial piece of the biological story, it allows the narrative to be framed simply as returning indigenous people versus foreign settlers or colonizers.
When the deeper biological reality is much closer to a family dispute.
Precisely, it overshadows the devastating biological truth that this conflict is, in many ways, occurring within the extended family lineage descended from ancient Israelites. And this profound biological reality, the shared ancestry, it forces us maybe to recast the entire conflict. The fundamental struggle here isn't really the traditional theological framing of Isaac versus Ishmael. Scientifically, historically, it's a far more tragic paradox. It's Isaac against Isaac, Jacob against Jacob, or really Israel divided, facing its own reflection.
That phrase really hits hard when you understand the genetics. The irony is almost unbearable.
It is the ultimate tragedy, isn't it? The Palestinians, who are demonstrably the primary biological heirs of the ancient Israelites who stayed on the land, find themselves in conflict with other heirs of Isaac, the returning Jews of the diaspora, carrying the same core Levantine ancestry, fighting over a land that is, biologically speaking, their shared communal ancestral inheritance.
So the question shifts entirely. It's no longer about who belongs, but how two branches of the same family can't recognize each other.
Absolutely. It shifts from the political argument of who has the exclusive right to this land to the devastatingly human question: how can the estranged descendants of Canaanite, Israelite possibly learn to share their common ancestral home?
When you look at it that way, the weight of this scientific data suggests the ongoing tragedy is biologically paradoxical. It's fratricide, in a sense.
Every individual, every victim on both sides carries elements of the same ancient ancestral legacy, the same blessing, if you will, encoded in their DNA.
The conflict is massively fueled by narratives of absolute difference.
While the genetics screams shared origin. So you've journeyed through these chambers with us, you've completed this deep dive, and you now carry this knowledge, months. And it is, make no mistake, both a profound burden and a profound power. We've confirmed today that the complexity of the truth is often the deepest, most valuable form of knowledge. This exploration has shown, I think, 3 unequivocal scientific points. First, there's a substantial shared Levantine genetic heritage that binds modern Jewish and Palestinian populations together, rooted in the Bronze Age Canaanite past, clearly visible in shared paternal lineages like J1, J2, and E1, B1b. Second, those fundamental political myths used to justify exclusive claims, the idea that Palestinians are just Goran Arabs or that Ashkenazi Jews are just Goran Europeans, they're scientifically unsustainable. The genetic evidence simply refutes them. And third, the divergence we see today, the cultural, religious, linguistic differences, is a relatively recent phenomenon, historically speaking.
It's built upon a single ancient biological foundation, one part of which stayed on the land, another part dispersed, but the root is the same. Use this knowledge, not to simplify the politics, because it's not simple, but use it to truly grasp the devastating, intricate complexity of the human story in the Levant.
Gravity, the amnesia of the stayed, forgetting their Canaanite Israelite roots, the amnesia of the returned, sometimes overlooking the Israelite roots of those who stayed. It feels like this shared ignorance is what allows the struggle for exclusivity to continue.
It certainly provides fertile ground for those narratives.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with this final provocative thought to wrestle with. If both groups were to somehow officially acknowledge, truly internalize this scientifically verified, shared Canaanite Israelite lineage, what political narrative really could possibly survive the weight of that heavily shared truth?
A profound question indeed. Thank you for joining us on this episode of House of Agnesio History Podcast. Take time to digest what you've learned, reflect on it, and when your thirst for truth is renewed, we will be here waiting for the next exploration. Take care.
Every stone in Judea bears the same secret. The Palestinian plows the land of his royal ancestors while cursing their name. The Jew prays at the tomb of his prophets while denying their blood flows in his neighbor's veins. Look at the anonymous graves on both sides. Soldiers fallen for Zion or Philistine. Children buried under bombs or rubble. Elders extinguished in bitterness. All carry in secret the same blessing engraved in their DNA. Blessed be Abraham through Isaac. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Every Israeli victim is a grandson of David, slain by the mother. Every Palestinian martyr is a daughter of Rachel, stabbed by her brother. The earth drinks a sacrilegious blood, the blood of Isaac, shed by Isaac. Abraham watches from the field of Machpelah. Sarah weeps in the cave of the patriarchs. Rachel sobs on the road to Ephrath. But the most heart-wrenching cry rises from the well of Beersheba. It is the voice of Isaac, aged and weary, watching his sons slaughter his grandsons while invoking his name. Woe to those who light the fire. Woe to the stirrers of discord who know this truth, but bury it under flags and ideologies. Woe to the manipulators who stoke fraternal hatreds to serve their ambitions or their dogmas. Woe to the guardians of silence who suffocate reconciliation. For it is written, woe to him who sows discord among brothers.